You're writing code and you're using AI assisted coding tools or vibe coding, and you're shipping faster than ever. But have you thought about security, and have you thought about how your vibe coded application might actually be extremely insecure? In this video, I'm going to give you a perspective on vibe coding security and how the app that you build with Claude Code or Cursor or any of these other AI assisted tools might not be as safe as you think. I'm Abhay. I run a multinational information security company, and I'm an application security expert with over 17 years of experience in application security. I train and teach at some of the world's largest conferences like Black Hat and DEF CON, and I run a training platform and AI-based security product called SecurityReview.ai as well. Now, vibe coding is something that you do quite often, I'm sure. If you're watching this video, you're likely to be doing a bunch of vibe coding on a daily basis, likely shipping a lot of your applications through a vibe coded setup, either using Claude Code or Cursor or Codex or any one of these tools. Now, the natural assumption is this, right? You write a prompt into the AI assisted coding tool or vibe coding tool. This essentially creates a plan of sorts because essentially goes through your code base or any existing code base, decides that it needs to implement this problem in a particular way, and then goes about writing code, writing tests, installing third-party libraries, and so on, and then completes this task and gets you your fully working application or feature. Now, so far, you're happy, the feature works just fine, the tests seem to pass, and the application is ready to ship. But there is an issue that you may not have been thinking about, and that issue relates to security. Now, apparently, 45% or more of vibe coded applications have serious security vulnerabilities. This is according to Vericode's recent report on vibe coded apps. In fact, their report is very damning, and they say that vibe coded applications have 2.74 times more number of vulnerabilities than human coded applications. In fact, their report also says that for Java, the failure rate or the security vulnerability rate hit a 72%, which means that 72% of Java applications had serious security vulnerabilities when they were vibe coded. Now, you would be shocked to see some statistics like this simply because all of us think that machines do a much better or much more secure job of implementing things. Of course, they're machines, so naturally, when they're writing things, they're naturally likely to do a better job of security and functionality. And it seems to work. Everything seems to be working correctly in terms of functionality. So the natural assumption is, oh, it must be secure. And the folks delivering these vibe coding tools must also have security in mind. Now, let me correct a few of those myths. The first thing, remember, vibe coded apps essentially uses, or vibe coding tools essentially use LLMs. And LLMs are trained on tons and tons and tons of human code. And throughout history, as we've all known, human code has also had a fair share of security issues. So really what these vibe coding tools are essentially doing is leveraging an LLM's capability to generate code. A lot of that code happens to be insecure, and because it's insecure, that code is likely to be translated into insecure code in your application as well. So never forget that the LLM, based on the kind of training you give it, is going to be the contributor of the bedrock of the problem, which is the LLM itself is trained on code bases, massive number of code bases. A lot of those code bases are vulnerable, hence your application might also have these vulnerabilities. That's not just the least of the problem, right? One of the other things you would assume is that within the harness like Claude Code or Cursor or Codex, they would have instructions to ensure that security is dealt with. Unfortunately, that's not the case as well. They do have some basic references to preventing injections or doing input validations and something like that. In fact, when Claude Code's code base leaked recently in February or March of this year, it was only a single line that basically said use security, ensure that applications don't have security issues like injection, and a couple of other references, nothing more than that. So it's very clear that even the vibe coding harnesses like your Claude Code or Cursor or Codex don't really have too many deep security instructions. And I think that kind of makes sense from their perspective, simply because they are trying to facilitate you building applications. And it's your responsibility as a developer in order to address security for your applications. And you need to be aware of security issues when you're building vibe coded tools. It's just that we've been sold on this perspective that, hey, anybody can be a developer. Vibe coding is, you don't need to know anything about the code you're writing. And a lot of people really believe that to be true and just build stuff, they ship stuff, it looks great, it probably works really as they intended, but the security might be a real mess in terms of the kind of security challenges that you're dealing with. There's another issue that I want to point out when it comes to vibe coded applications, and that's around architecture. I've been a security consultant for over 17 years now, and my focus is application security. And over the years, I have seen how applications evolve, what kind of security issues they have. I have been front and center of dealing with thousands of security engagements involving insecure applications, where I've had to identify and flag these insecure applications to my customers. One of the common issues I see is software architecture and security business logic issues, right? Now, this is not an injection flaw like SQL injection or so on, which is typically dealt with in most cases. These are more subtle issues, right? Can this user access this capability? That sort of stuff, authorization issues, or more subtle business logic issues. Should this user be allowed to perform this particular action that would allow them to edit this particular value or something like that, right? Now, these are the kind of issues that most of our applications are typically dealing with. In fact, if you're building business critical applications or any kind of enterprise applications or SaaS applications, the good chance is that you're going to be dealing with these issues. And herein lies the problem of vibe coding, because in a vibe coded scenario, every single time you start a new session in the vibe coded tool, you don't really have any context, and it does not really have any context of a centralized application architecture or the kind of architectural patterns that you are supposed to follow. So as a result, you essentially get this mess of different types of architecture in the same application where there's no cohesive security architecture possible. And this is kind of reflected in the numbers. In fact, Apiro, a security company, recently pointed out that there is a 322% increase in privilege escalation vulnerabilities and security architecture related vulnerabilities in vibe coded apps. So the real challenge, aside from the fact that the vibe coded tools generate insecure code, vibe coded tools also generate code that is architecturally insecure. Not just the code being insecure or the implementation of the code being insecure, the architecture, which forms the basis of the entire application, also being insecure. Let's talk about a subtler but actually bigger challenge when it comes to vibe coded applications, and that is supply chain security, or in simpler terms, the software libraries that you use. Now, when you're writing any kind of applications, you are going to be using software libraries. It could be third-party libraries in Python or JavaScript or Java or what have you, right? Now, a lot of times when you're using vibe coded tools, they would just randomly pull versions of these packages or software libraries that may be vulnerable to very, very serious issues. In fact, according to Usenix, more recently, they had actually tested out 576,000 different applications, and they found that 20 to 25% of the time, the AI-assisted coding tool just randomly pulled non-existent library names and versions and started trying to install them in the application. On the one hand, non-existent is probably fine, but that's really just a hallucination. But it also, in many cases, installs versions of libraries that are insecure with several major security issues and exploitable issues. And this is where it becomes a problem, because over the last year, you would have seen an explosion in the amount of supply chain security attacks that have been happening. And I would say that with vibe coded tools, that's likely to be much higher, because today your vibe coded tool might just pull a version of that library which is vulnerable and is actively exploited on the internet. So not only is there a code security implementation problem, and not only is there a secure architecture implementation problem, there is also a huge supply chain impact to vibe coded applications that you may not be aware of. Now, fortunately, you have some approaches to deal with this, right? First of all, you need to leverage certain capabilities and skills within the IDE that you have in order to help you build out more secure code by default. You can use skills, you can use MCPs, you can use tools. These are things that you can do in order to protect yourself. Similar thing is something you can do with supply chain security as well. You can leverage skills and tools in order to achieve some of this stuff. For software architecture related issues, also you need to basically write some skills or use some skills in order to achieve a consistent type of security architecture in your application. But overall, one of the things that I just want to say is that vibe coded applications give you tremendous capability to ship stuff. They give you a lot of power and you're able to ship stuff at unprecedented pace. But you're also shipping security vulnerabilities at that same unprecedented pace. So it's very important for you to understand that when you're dealing with vibe coded tools, it's the whole notion that not knowing anything about coding or knowing very little about what code you're writing or the security issues you're dealing with is not really necessary, because vibe coding really takes care of the whole thing. That's simply not true. And I want to remind you that this is your code that's probably running important operations for you or your organization. It's very important to think about security and act proactively before this becomes a massive problem that balloons into security debt and technical debt as you go along building and maintaining these applications. I hope you found this useful and I hope you enjoyed this video. Please consider liking and subscribing to my channel for more content like this. Thank you so much.